1994. Nigerian writer and activist Wole Soyinka escaping impending arrest for having opposed the military government. A life in exile started, remote opposition, and writing beautiful words that earned him the Nobel Prize of Literature. In this documentary, we explore the journey that Soyinka undertook from being a village boy that didn't want to achieve anything to becoming called the conscience of the nation of Nigeria. November 1994. Nigerian writer and activist Wole Soyinka is on the road fleeing from impending arrest ordered by Nigerian dictator Sani Abacha. General Abacha had seized power just a year ago in a coup d'etat and was tightening his grip on the country. The general imposed drastic economic reforms that dramatically increased Nigeria's economic growth, but at the cost of blatant corruption and gross human rights violations. Any resistance to the regime was muzzled by force. And Wole Soyinka, as co-founder of the underground opposition, had dared to oppose Abacha by calling for international sanctions. Now, more than 25 years later, Wole Soyinka still has vivid memories of this ordeal.
I had to accept the fact that maybe I was the only one of the entire movement against Abacha's dictatorship who could create an alternative voice, radio voice. I accepted the fact that I had to leave the country.
Soyinka had every reason to escape. The Abacha regime was known for killing anyone standing up against them. Even the fact that Soyinka was already a Nobel Prize-winning writer would not have saved him. The hasty journey started by car from his home.
I was in Abeokuta when it became clear that the chips were down. I either leave or get captured. So I got in the car, pretended I was on a hunting trip. And so even though there were soldiers, roadblocks and so on everywhere, they recognized me and actually passed through some of those roadblocks and went along the smuggler's route to Iseng and the crossing of the main river to the Republic of Benin.
The journey concluded in the United States, from where Soyinka managed to found the shortwave clandestine radio Kudirat, offering a voice for the oppressed opposition in Nigeria.
This is Radio Kudirat Nigeria, the voice of democracy.
Wole Soyinka had left his ancestral Yoruba land in southwest Nigeria, where he was born on the 13th of July, 1934, in the town of Abeokuta. He was raised in the neighborhood called Ake. Soyinka describes his young years in the 1981 memoirs Ake, The Years of Childhood. In Ake, Soyinka also mentions his St. Peter's Primary School that still exists. But the building that had Wole's classrooms is being demolished. Soyinka's father used to be the head teacher here. He says that his parents have sown the seeds for his life as a writer and activist by often debating about Nigeria's British colonial rulers.
I grew up in a community, family environment in which the sense of nationalism was quite strong. My uncles, my parents, they used to argue quite a lot. This discussion was going on. And so there were manifold aspects of viewing our condition. And I was bombarded, as a curious child, I was a very curious child, I was bombarded with many aspects, different aspects of that.
Wole Soyinka's secondary school, the Abeokuta Grammar School, is also mentioned in Ake. It, in the meantime, became the seat of the Bishop of the Anglican Church in Nigeria. The bishop says that the young Wole was befriending members of the Ransom Kuti family in Nigeria, who were all respected here in Yoruba land. This family produced the influential Nigerian women's rights activist Funmilayo Ransom Kuti and Hassan Fela, who was a famous musician and activist. Wole shared rooms with his cousin Fela, and through him, he got further in touch with the Ransom Kuti family.
They were role models for him because the Ransom Kutis were very principled, very educated, very principled, and they produced generations of leaders in this country as far as educational training is concerned. So the academic erudition of Wole Soyinka, the cultivation of his academic virtues, his strength, was built here.
In this environment, Soyinka was encouraged to read a lot. It made him become a writer, although he says he didn't intend to.
I suppose along the way, I sort of thought, well, I'm reading about all these people, all these strange characters and so on. And I began to put my own characters in place of what I read. So it was a kind of gradual process. I don't think I just woke up one day and said, as a result of an experience, I have to be a writer. At least I don't recall it.
Wole Soyinka accepted his remarkable talent for writing and took it to the University of Ibadan, where he went to study English. There, he founded the Pirates Confraternity, campaigning against corruption and injustice. It was the first confraternity in Nigeria and can be seen as Soyinka's emerging activism. Soyinka believes he was infused with activism at a young age, seeing poverty around him. Just like his writing, stumbled into it.
It's a strange process, I suppose, is that in spite of, shall we say, the progressive nature of my parents, my relations, that I also saw early enough contradictions. Let's say among my siblings, my schoolmates and so on. I saw the disparity between their social conditions and my own, which was privileged. All these various observations, hints, actualities observed coalesced progressively towards feeling that it was the most natural thing to try and at least obviate these contradictions, inequalities within society.
His activism didn't stop Soyinka from writing. He went to study English in the United Kingdom, and there he wrote plays for the groundbreaking Royal Court Theatre in London. He went back to Nigeria after graduating in 1960. Soyinka returned in the middle of the country's celebration of independence from England. For that, Soyinka wrote the play A Dance of the Forests, in which he dared to question the benefits independence was supposed to bring. The play was therefore not received well, but Soyinka says he could not just jubilate the country's liberation from the colonial yokes.
I found that there was as much to celebrate as to deplore, as to be apprehensive about in the approaching future.
In the years after, Soyinka demonstrated a growing militancy. He invaded a radio station in Ibadan in 1964, protesting against fraud during local elections. This got Soyinka in prison for the first time. But he continued criticizing politicians and power, like in the 1965 Kongi's Harvest, that is about an African dictator staging a coup.
When the next in line claps his hand upon the monarch's mouth, it is time for him to take the finals.
It made Soyinka's fame grow, and he was somehow automatically given access to the political leaders at the time. In 1967, he secured a meeting with rebel commander Ojukwu, hoping to avoid the Biafra War, but he failed. A bloody war broke out that lasted until 1970. Interfering with state affairs got Soyinka in prison again, for 2 years in solitary confinement. To keep busy, he was writing notes on pieces of paper that were smuggled in. They formed the base of his 1971 prison memoirs. This prison experience hardened Soyinka, but he kept publishing critical plays and novels. Among the most famous works of Wole Soyinka are his 1959 play, The Lion and the Jewel, about the value of Nigerian traditions versus European innovation.
Why then? Why don't you sit down and listen?
Throughout his work, Soyinka always chooses themes related to the use and abuse of power. His Oeuvre in 1986 earned him the Nobel Prize for Literature. The jury appreciated Soyinka's ability to write beautiful words and strong stories based on his apprehension against injustice in society. Wole Soyinka in his Nobel period was mostly writing plays following the oral tradition of the Yoruba. But he also used the structure of classic Greek drama. The combining of indigenous and European literary cultures distinguished Soyinka from other African writers of his time. The style itself is in line with Yoruba storytelling, rich in wordings and abundant of metaphors. This particular style was observed by Professor Adodekun of the University of Ibadan, who has studied Wole Soyinka for 50 years and is a great admirer.
My conclusion about Soyinka, as I told you, that he's a semi-god. It's like we can compare him with Shakespeare. We can compare him, as I said, with Aeschylus, Sophocles, in the magnitude of his language, which is not even accessible to the intellectuals.
After the Nobel Prize, a global journey of public performances started, and writing even more. But that was until 1994 when Soyinka felt he had to leave everything behind to escape from General Abacha. To get away alive from General Abacha in 1994, Soyinka had to abandon a life, an act that might be symbolized by having left alone his collection of statues that belong to Soyinka's Yoruba culture. The Yoruba live in the southwest of the country. Their culture is best represented through a society of statues embodying the gods and forces belonging to their pantheistic religion. The Yoruba belief carries the virtue of improvement of society and oneself through meditation and study. This developed into a sophisticated set of rituals and norms for human conduct. This helped the Yoruba to become an economical and political force in Nigeria up to the present day. Soyinka, being raised in Yoruba land, had absorbed this culture, but in order to survive, he had to leave it all behind.
I said to myself, all right, you've enjoyed all these, now just abandon them. But right now, the situation is such that they're in fact no longer yours because you are not in a condition of freedom in which you appreciate, you associate with them, that they're part of your life.
From abroad, Soyinka continued his opposition against Abacha, in hiding, fearing for Abacha's secret foreign operatives. And in 1995, Soyinka saw his worst fears confirmed by the hanging in Nigeria of his friend and fellow writer-activist Ken Saro-Wiwa under General Abacha's orders. Ken Saro-Wiwa, just like Wole Soyinka, had dared to oppose Abacha by campaigning against the government-enforced oil extraction in the Niger Delta. And on the 10th of November 1995, Ken Saro-Wiwa paid the ultimate price for that when he was executed. For Soyinka, this was a double shock, since Ken Saro-Wiwa a few years earlier had sought advice from him on a document vowing for better rights for the affected tribes in the Niger Delta.
We met in Stockholm, for instance. He was coming from the United Nations, where he'd been agitating for the recognition of the Ogoni as one of the threatened indigenous tribes. He'd been to see me in Abeokuta, by the way, with his son. They came in a small delegation with the Kaima Declaration. And I promised that I would do whatever I could at the time that I backed it wholly, the rights of the indigenous people.
This was the last time Soyinka had seen Ken Saro-Wiwa, and the execution made Soyinka deeply disappointed and angry.
The killing of Ken Saro-Wiwa did two things. One, on the one hand, it frankly made me despair of the possibilities, the potentiality of power as such. Power is something I've always engaged myself in, intellectually, in essays and so on. But to see the ruthlessness, the brutality of power exercised under the veneer of state legitimacy crystallized my struggle also in ways which I hadn't suspected. It just meant for me a declaration of war against humanity by a bunch of psychopaths.
Soyinka continued his struggle from abroad by publishing in favor of the opposition in Nigeria. It would take until 1999 before he would return to Nigeria, when dictator Abacha died and civilian rule was restored. Nigeria was on its knees for him because of his continuous voice of opposition. He was even offered a bid for the 1999 presidency, but according to his former personal assistant Tunde Awosamni, he refused.
His reason was that, one, he does not have the temperament for regimented living. Okay, becoming president would make him to become regimental.
Wole Soyinka was treated as a Pan-African hero of liberation and became an example for the generations after him. Among them are filmmakers, students, writers, and theater directors. There is Toyin Oshinaike, who focuses on plays of Wole Soyinka like King Babu, inspired by Abacha from 2001.
So many people have seen what's been happening in the country and have not been able to put them in a play, like a reportage in a play. And he has done that. Most other plays that you find is about the social African life, but he writes more about the political climate of our society.
I will not make any journey. That is, not yet.
There is Odia Ofemun, who became a poet after having gotten approval from Soyinka by paying him a visit and presenting his work.
Looked at them and asked, "Are you sure you wrote them?" Frankly, I wasn't looking very, very decent in a university sense because I was dressed like a factory lover. I had a shirt tied by my navel and I was wearing bedroom slippers. So I was just like anybody off the street. Which was why he had to ask the question, "Are you sure you wrote them?" From that moment, I knew I could call myself a poet because it meant that he liked the poems I brought.
In retrospect, one can say that Wole Soyinka, despite his writing style, created himself a global presence. And inside Nigeria, he became a voice to be recognized. And especially in an economic powerhouse like Nigeria, with its deep divide between rich and poor and tension between Christianity and Islam, there is always something to argue about. And Wole Soyinka is always on the forefront to give his comments. Not because he wants to, but he says he has to.
People don't believe me, but I'm really a glutton for tranquility. I'm really a closet, tranquil person. The problem I have is that my tranquility is disturbed by the unacceptable. And so I would say that what people call activism is just perhaps just a selfish form of existence, of intervention, that I want to get back to my peace of mind, my tranquil state. And therefore, when there are events, circumstances, forms of conduct in society, no matter who's responsible, which disturb my tranquility, then I have to do something about it. So I hope you'll organize that.
And Soyinka is now looking at being cherished wherever he goes. Although that made him ambivalent.
There are moments when it's good to be recognized, but think of the interruption of your private life. Think of how the constituency balloons when all you're thinking of is getting back into those private moments where you can create or just do absolutely nothing.
But Soyinka didn't choose to fade away quietly in his mansion on the countryside. And recently, Soyinka is being seen disturbed by the attacks in Nigeria by the extremist Boko Haram.
Boko Haram, this is something which has to be exterminated. I mean, without any compromise. This is not a period for political correctness. It's a period in global existence of intolerance of the intolerant. Those who are not tolerant, we should be intolerant towards them.
And according to people around Soyinka, he will continue to raise issues. And for that, he already received the attribution of being the conscience of the nation.
Soyinka happens to be a national, a producer of national conscience, in the sense that he is outspoken on all issues. And he takes positions that are not necessarily of an economic nature, but has been able to stand as a moral conscience in a way that very few other people have been.
And even though being born in 1934, he's not likely to stop.
I don't see him fully retiring. I don't see him fully retiring because the only punishment you can give him is to tell him to stop working, is to cause him to stop working. And I don't see him as somebody who is ever going to stop working.
Wole's son Olaokun agrees with this, but hopes that people realize what they're demanding from him.
People send me letters and they invite him to this event that is going to make, I look at it and I think that's not considerate. He's going to have to travel make such an effort and travel and put up with so much at 81. You should have considered that it's time to reduce the pressure on him to be everywhere at once.
And he keeps creating by publishing and raising his voice when he deems necessary. And retirement? That's an academic issue.
I even made the mistake of announcing publicly once that I was retiring. And then I had to swallow my words and say, oh no, what I should have said is that I am now a student of retirement, and that I may graduate this year, and then I'll do my postgraduate next year, and eventually I'll do my PhD in retirement, by which time I'm probably gone. That's what I cope with it.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, Wole Soyinka. Happy birthday to you.